guy here. This is kind of a special, more like a public appeal or public service announcement than it is any kind of a book review, because the book that I'm bringing to you is this one. It's With Geronimo Across Europe, written by R. Edward O'Brien, this guy right here. Rest of the title is An Odyssey, More Laugh Than Tears. Yes, pretty dreadful title, and I gotta tell you, it's pretty badly written. Could really stand at least one editing. I mean, ALTER for altar in a church, which, if you think about it, I guess you do go to church to get changed. Not something that I would have read for its literary value or for any kind of skill, and so you're wondering, why am I bothering with this? Because this is one of the best first-hand accounts of what it was like for the average ground pounder to go through World War II. You know, not anybody famous, not Patton or any of the generals, but just some regular guy. Now, O'Brien was a combat medic, and he was a part of the 101st Airborne, so that's not exactly your standard ground pounder. Those are pretty elite units, and that's a pretty elite job. But still, he talks about the day-to-day. I mean, what it was like to be just in the ranks in at least two of the most horrific battles, the Operation Market Garden that he parachuted into, and the defense of Bastogne, which he sort of fell into like the rest of the 101st Airborne. In fact, there's a very long description, a pretty harrowing one, of how O'Brien avoided being captured by the Germans at the beginning of that. So why would I then bring this up? And of course there are much better written, much more professional books written. That's because these first-hand testimonials, which are pretty much put up by vanity presses, and yes, it's the 101st Airborne Division Association that printed this, and oh look, I have a signed copy of it. And you can't even find this. I mean, I did a quick search on the internet, and there's a couple of copies here and there. So, again, why talk about a book that you can't even find? Because I found this in a thrift shop. And these are starting to appear in thrift shops, and Goodwills, and places like that all across the country, because this generation is dying. It's toward the end of their lifespan. They're in their 90s now. And, you know, they die, and the family goes in, and they start searching through, and they find these vanity presses and these little testimonials, and they don't want them, or they may have already read them, or they don't know what they have, so they send them to the thrift shops, and they are disappearing. So I recommend that if you run across them, that you grab them, if anything, to preserve this narrative history of what happened during these wars and these battles. Because yes, the Cornelius Ryans and a lot of those books are going to go on forever, but the actual witnesses, the ones who were there, that stuff's going to get lost. So grab them if you can. Not again that I recommend you read them or do them for any kind of literary value, and if it's not your thing, I understand, but just to preserve the narrative, if anything. See, you'll be very much surprised by what your dads and granddads and your grandmoms were getting up to over there in Europe and Japan while they were, you know, making the world safe for democracy. Yes, I know that is the wrong war. That was the one first. The second war to make the world safe for democracy. Now, I have an interest because my dad fought in World War II and in Korea. He was slated to go to Vietnam, but figured 2 wars was enough. Very wise. And in World War II, he was a part of the 602nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, which was attached to Patton's Third Army, and he drove a Jeep with a 50 caliber on it. His job was to go out like 10 to 15 miles ahead and see what was there. Well, what was there were the Germans, so he'd get shot at, he'd shoot at them, run back, hide, typical. He never really talked about it that much. He told me about a couple things, about an instance where he ended up in Prague. I believe it was Prague, although that doesn't make a lot of sense based on the history, where he almost got pasted by a German 88, and that he found himself in the middle of the biggest Western Front tank battle, the one at Ericourt. But he didn't give a lot of detail, and I'm grateful for books like this one, that do. Now, in contrast, my biological mother's side fought for the Germans. Yes, they did. My grandfather was a communist shop steward in the town of Heilbronn for the Trolley Association, and he used to get into street battles with the Nazis because the communists and the Nazis didn't like each other. He was very vocal, and the Gestapo was coming for him to throw him into a concentration camp when a doctor friend of his got him into the German army. And apparently if you joined the German army, all sins were forgiven. Well, my grandfather was a little too old. He was in his 40s at that time, so they made him a prison guard at a small prison located near Heilbronn that was for French and Canadian officers. My grandfather was essentially Sergeant Schultz, and some of the tales that I've been told by the family about what he did then are pretty funny, actually. I had a granduncle who was a stable keeper for the German army, and two other uncles, direct uncles, one who was in the Hitler Youth when the war ended and had to make an escape across Germany to get home, and a second uncle who was a fanatical Nazi, in fact was a member of the German SS Honor Guard. I always wonder sometimes if my dad and my uncle were shooting at each other at any point. So, my interest is there because I am made from war. How these two families got together was a result of World War II, and you are made from war too. I firmly believe that the entire history of the modern world is all pegged to World War II, and we are still affected by the ripples of that, and probably will for another 100 to 200 years, until World War III comes along. Which, by the way, should only last about 30 minutes. So whether you're into it or not, and you don't believe in war, and you believe that somehow the humanity has advanced where we're all so nice and wonderful now that there will never be any other wars, I of course laugh at you, because yet there's been one constant throughout human history, it's that we throw spears at each other. But if you are interested in what your parents and grandparents were getting up to, I'd recommend you grab a few of these things when you run across them. Give a laugh. Please don't read them for their literary ability, because, ooh boy, are they bad. But it is a good history. So, what we got here?